Oh boy, we are excited. So CBS Sports, we have our own top 25. By the way, you can check out the full list, cbssports.com. And day by day, we're working through up to number one. Yesterday, we talked about the Utes coming in at number 4. Today, it is the reigning national champs, the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's welcome in college football writer and expert Dennis Dodd here. Dennis, somehow I found the scepter in this little room that we're in temporarily, so I'm going to keep it because Georgia, they are the champs there. If they would like to avoid a title hangover, what is the biggest challenge in doing that?
Well, I think Kirby Smart's already addressed it. I asked him directly at the media days, how do you keep from having a hangover? How does it feel to be the hunted? And he said, no. We're the hunter in every game. We'll never be the hunted. Our legacy won't allow us to do that. So if you look at the schedule, if you look at the returning players, because there aren't a lot, but I think the motivation there for them is let's go get our own ring. And then you look at the SEC and the fact that they're going to have a cakewalk basically in the SEC East. There's no reason why they shouldn't be back in the playoff. And once you get there, it could be a crapshoot. I mean, we could see a repeat of last year where a team, whether it be Alabama or Georgia, loses the championship game and still remains in the top 4 and is able to play for the championship. I really think that could be the case this year. And all that ties in to giving Georgia a chance to go back-to-back. Not enough people are talking about that, in my opinion. You throw in Stetson Bennett, who goes from taking no snaps in 2021 spring to now being the guy and not having to look over his shoulder. I think it's actually easier for him this year in year 6 as an established quarterback.
We're going to talk about him in just a minute. So whether it's the SEC championship or if it's the national championship, let's talk about Georgia compared to Alabama. Alabama spoiling the perfect season. Alabama winning the SEC championship, Georgia getting revenge in the national championship. But right now, how do you compare these two teams to one another? Does Georgia need to close the gap when it comes to Alabama?
Well, it's funny that we're talking about Georgia closing the gap a year after winning a national championship, but I get it. Alabama is the clear number 1. They're better than everybody. We knew it from the beginning. In 2020, when they had those 6 first-round draft choices, they were looking at 21 as a gap year, if you will, and ended up, coming within 10 minutes of winning a national championship. I think the same goes for Georgia because of all the reasons I just mentioned. I think they have the players, they have the schedule. We'll talk more about that to get back. And I think there's still that, that hunter mentality there that they can get back. Are they as talented as Alabama? No, but they've cracked the code. Kirby Smart has cracked the code. In a one-game situation, actually it was 2 last year, they got routed by Alabama in the SEC championship game. But when it counted, and it did count more then, Kirby Smart was there, and that defense came through. So is the defense going to be as good? No. But how about being top 10? Is that okay? I think it is.
You mentioned early on losing a bunch of players to the draft, Georgia losing a record 15 players to the draft. We know their recruiting is great. So how do the guys coming into those positions stack up maybe against the ones that left?
Well, it's a bunch of guys. We don't know all their names yet, but we will. It's kind of like what Alabama's done over the years. Only 3 returning starters on defense. Jalen Carter may have been the best defensive player Georgia had last year, and he's an underclassman. He's still got a year to go. Defensive tackle. He's going to be great up the middle. Keely Ringo, the corner who has All-America aspirations, he's the guy who had that insurance pick 6 at the end against Alabama to clinch things. And so they've got players all over the field. Nolan Smith Jr., who's probably the most athletic player on the defense, a linebacker, who's skiing black diamond slopes in Montana with his girlfriend, Amanda. That's how athletic this guy is. I asked him at SEC Media Days, he said he was skiing green slopes on the first day. He got lessons, and he could twitch his hips. And the lesson person said, "I can tell you're an athlete. You can switch your hips. If you can switch your hips making tackles, you can switch your hips and move them around and ski the black diamonds."
Are his coaches signing off on this? Because if I'm Kirby Smart, I'm like, please get off the black diamond there on the mountain. Stay on the ground, dude.
Yeah, this is like an NFL contract. Like no skiing, no basketball, no motorcycles, nothing like that. You can injure yourself. That's a good question. I'm going to ask Kirby that next time I see him.
Twitchy hips or not, we do not want you hurting yourself when it comes to skiing. Let's talk about Stetson Bennett. Look, regardless last season, I mean, he's an incredible story there. I thought it was really interesting. I found this article on 24/7 Sports. Other coaches in the SEC talking about him saying, look, he's been disrespected. He's underestimated. These are all sentiments that Kirby Smart says of Stetson Bennett. What are some of the improvements we are already seeing from him from last season to this season?
Well, as I mentioned up top, I just think the monkey off his back. He doesn't have to look at JT Daniels. He doesn't have to look at those young quarterbacks behind him. He's the man. And you're right, he is accomplished. He's been underrated and disrespected his whole career. Not that he shouldn't have. A guy who transferred to Lane Community College and then came back and walked on and tried to get a spot, probably deserves some of that. But he stuck with it in his 6th year. There were 3 players last year, Amanda, that averaged 10 yards per pass. And that's a significant stat when you're a quarterback. Grayson McCall, Stetson Bennett, and C.J. Stroud, who many think is the Heisman Trophy favorite this year at Ohio State. So that's something. That ain't nothing.
Let's talk about the tight ends here, because you get the return of Brock Bowers, who put up the most productive season for a tight end in Georgia history, the return of Darnell Washington. You're adding in now Eric Gilbert. Is there a chance for them to not just outperform these wide receivers, but maybe be one of the most talented position groups in the country?
Yeah, I think they are the most talented tight end room in the country. It's pretty obvious. When you start with Brock Bowers, he's kind of that hybrid guy that you see in the NFL who can line up in the slot, can beat you in the slot, short and long, can line up in the outside, is a great blocker, by the way. Freshman All-American, going to be an All-American probably this year. Eric Gilbert, who's had some off-season problems, but was the #1 recruit in the country a couple of years ago at LSU. And then Darnell Washington, the #2 athlete is mentioned there in the 24/7 2020 recruiting class, is just tall. They can throw it up for him, get in the end zone, go get the ball, big fella. So they're loaded. It doesn't even matter that they're not labeled receivers. They can all run, they can all go get the ball, and they're all supremely talented at their position.
Let's look at the schedule, because you mentioned the schedule may be a path to the national championship there. Out of SEC games, CBS Sports ranking the Bulldogs easier than most at 11, which is Kentucky, Mizzou, and Ole Miss, with easier schedules in the SEC. So walk us through this schedule and how the Bulldogs make it work for them.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. You already see Oregon is a 2.5 point or 2 touchdown underdog in the opener. As much intrigue as that has with their old defensive coordinator, it's not a good game for Dan Lanning to debut in Georgia, by the way, at Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta. Look at those first 7 games. I would submit to you right now that Georgia is going to be a double-digit favorite in every one of those first 7 games going into the Florida game on October 29th. And they'll be favored to beat Florida. And if you look at the rest of the way, their only SEC road games are at South Carolina, at Missouri, at Mississippi State, and then in November, I'll give you at Kentucky. That's only 4 SEC road games. Amanda, this has 12-0 written all over it. Now, what they're going to do in the championship game, we already had that discussion about Alabama, but if they're 12-0 and they lose, they're getting in the playoff.
It's exactly what happened last season. So let's look at some of those futures there. They are plus 140 to win the SEC behind Alabama. They are minus 120 to make it to the playoff. So the odds are in their favor there. Plus 425 to win it all behind Alabama, Ohio State. And then you find the Bulldogs there. What is your prediction for their season, and maybe where you would put some money on these odds?
I like Georgia to get to the championship game. I would be all over that, whether it's 12-0 or 11-1. You take your chances with Alabama. But again, people are rating them in the top 3. They think they're going to be in the playoff by the end of the season. And I'm among those. I forgot to mention the receivers. Karis Jackson, some of those other guys have combined for 76 catches last year. So missing George Pickens and some of the other guys from their talented recruiting class hasn't mattered at all so far.
Dennis Dodd, we call you the Dodd father. If I could knight you, then you would be Sir Dennis Dodd, which I feel like is appropriate here for HQ and the world of college football. We'll talk to you very soon. So we are working our way to the #1 team, according to CBS Sports, which is Alabama. Tomorrow, taking a look at Ohio State, and then Alabama with a quote-unquote rebuilding year last year. How the Tide are looking right now. And if you would like to know all things about the world of college football, make sure to download and follow the Cover 3 podcast with our good friend Chip Patterson hosting that. It is a great time. If you haven't been listening, I really don't know what you're doing, so go ahead and download and follow. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.